Hey Mac 3, how's it going? Welcome to week 17, which is crazy. I know this week is going to be weird because I'm gone, but I want you all to do your best, act like I'm right there with you. We'll be going through lessons and assignments just like we normally do. I'm just on a screen, not right there in front of you. So this week, today, your job today is to go through this Edpuzzle, take notes if you need to. And then on Friday, you'll have a work day in class on the Big Ideas assignment. It'll actually be posted today, so you can get started on it. But know that you'll have all class period tomorrow, and then it'll be due Sunday night at midnight. Monday, you'll have another Edpuzzle on 10.4 that you'll be watching in class. And then on Tuesday, similar kind of schedule, you'll have a work day on that Big Ideas, and it'll be due then Wednesday night at midnight, and that'll be your asynchronous work. Keep in mind, you will get credit for these Edpuzzles, right? It's kind of like participation. So really, there's 4 graded assignments. These Edpuzzles, you're just going to get an easy 10 points if you watch all the way through it, okay? All right, so let's dive in. We've been talking about our stats unit. And so we're going to continue with that data analysis and statistics idea. And our essential question to think about for these next few days are, what are some considerations when undertaking a statistical study? Right? In a statistical study, researchers put together different questions and a design of a study to try and answer a question, right? But there are a lot of things to consider in those designs. So the first thing, let's look at some sampling techniques. We want to determine whether each sample is representative of the population. And then we want to explain a little bit. Okay. So the first one says, to determine the number of hours people exercise during a week, researchers use random digit dialing and call 1,500 people. Well, it's not super representative of the population because it's not going to give you a random sampling of what you want, right? Maybe those people won't answer because maybe they are exercising, right? Maybe the younger generation is going to answer the phone more, not the older generation that puts their phone down, kind of thing. So it's not going to be super representative of our population there. Second one, to determine how many text messages high school students send in a week, researchers post a survey on a website and receive 750 responses. Well, no, because members of the population that don't have access to online resources will not be able to participate in the study. Okay. I think I've got another one for you, maybe 2 more. To determine how much money college students spend on clothes each semester, a researcher surveys 450 college students as they leave the university library. This is also no, because students who are not in the library can't participate in the study. Okay. And then lastly, to determine the quality of service customers receive, an airline sends an email survey to each customer after the completion of a flight. Still no, because only those customers who choose to respond are surveyed, right? The other customers aren't surveyed, so it's going to be biased one way or the other, right? Okay, so this is just to get our gears turning. You don't have to be writing anything down yet. We're just looking kind of at our gears turning and understanding these sampling techniques. Then it takes a step further and says, okay, well, what about the types of questions? We want to determine if each question is biased, and then maybe reword it so that it's not biased. Okay, so again, you don't have to write anything down. We will kind of define what makes it biased a little bit later on. We're just getting our gears turning. So first, we want to determine if it's biased or not. First question says, does eating nutritious whole grain foods improve your health? It's kind of like prompting you to say yes, right? It's kind of saying, well, I'm going to feel bad if I say no because it says it's nutritious and it says it's improving my health, right? So it is biased. Maybe one way to reword this question is, what effects does eating whole grain foods have on your health? Do you see the difference? Second one, do you ever attempt the dangerous activity of texting while driving, right? You all are on that age of driving now. This question, though, the way it's posed, is definitely biased. It throws in that word dangerous activity, making you feel like you should say no, right? Do you ever attempt the dangerous activity of texting while driving? Well, no, I don't, even though I do, right? So maybe a way to reword that is just, do you text while driving? Makes it a little bit more open to answering. C, how many hours do you sleep each night? Completely unbiased, simple question, good to go, right? It's not biased one way or the other. It can just be answered. Last one, how can the mayor of your city improve his or her public image? Well, shoot, that's a little bit biased because that implies that the image is bad, right? Okay, so just to get your gears turning on what might show a bias and what might not, and we will define that in a little bit. Let's go back to those sampling techniques. We've got many different types of samples. And this, in a minute, I'll give you time to pause your video and write all these down. It is going to be a little bit of writing, but it'll be helpful in the end. So we actually have 5 different types of samples. The first type is a self-selected sample. Excuse me, in a self-selected sample, members of a population can volunteer to be in the sample. It's kind of in the name. They are self-selecting themselves to be in the sample. For a systematic sample, the second one, a rule is used to select members of a population. For example, a pattern, right? If I select every other person or every third person, that's a rule or a pattern that helps me select my sample. So it's systematic. Third one, stratified sample is when a population is divided into smaller groups that share some kind of similar characteristic, and then a sample is randomly selected from each group. Okay, so let's say I group you by a certain characteristic, then I go in and randomly pick from those group. That would be called a stratified sample. Number 4, a cluster sample is a population that's divided into groups called clusters, and all of the members in one or more of the clusters are selected. So I split into groups, but then I pick group B and I do everybody in group B. That's a cluster sample. I'm sampling the cluster, right? And then lastly, we have convenience sample. Only members of a population who are easy to reach are selected. So it's just easy for me to access these people. So it's convenient. What I want you to do is pause your video and I want you to write down these notes. I'll pause it here on these 4 and then you can unpause it and I'll scroll. Ready, go. Okay, hopefully you got those 4 down. Here's the last one. Pause and write. Okay, so now that we have all of our types of samples, let's kind of practice what we just learned, right? You want to determine whether students in your school like the new design of the school's website. We want to identify the type of sample described for all this type, okay? The first time, you list all the students alphabetically and choose every 6th student. What type of sample is being described? Now, I'm going to walk through these ones with you, and then in the next one, you're going to try some. But if my pencil would write, because I'm choosing every 6th student, that's essentially a rule, right? If you look back at your notes, a rule implies a systematic, if I can spell, that's what I was looking at, sample. Some kind of rule implies that it's a systematic sample. Okay. Second type, you mail questionnaires and use only the questionnaires that are returned. We want to know what of those 5 it represents. Well, if I'm using only the questionnaires that are returned, my participants chose to return those, right? So by them choosing, it's self-selected. So they chose to respond, just giving you a little justification here. Therefore, this type is called self-selected. They selected by themselves to participate in the study. Okay, let's do two more. You ask all of the students in your algebra class. You're in algebra with them, you just ask everybody in your algebra class. Remember the goal though of your study. The goal of your study is you want to determine whether students in your school like the new design of the school's website. Well, this is super convenient for you. You're in class with your algebra classmates, so it's convenience, right? Not much I need to say about that one. It's just the convenience type of study, right? And then the last one, you randomly select 2 students from each classroom. Okay, because we're looking at each classroom, students are already grouped by classroom, and now we're randomly selecting students from each classroom, and that's called the stratified. Because I'm randomly selecting from groups. So you can think of this as groups. Sorry if you can hear my dog in the background. Okay, cool. So that's just a little example. Now he thinks we're calling him. Now I want you to go through and first try and find the type of sample. Hold on, I'm gonna pause my video for a second and take care of this dog. Okay, so I want you to go through these 2 and identify the types of samples, and then we're going to have a discussion on why the sample might be biased. But first, identify the types of samples like we did in the previous problem. Pause your video, try it out. Okay, so let's see if you got these correct. The first one says, a news organization asks its viewers to participate in an online poll about bullying. The type of sample is a self-selected sample, right? It's asking the viewers to participate, right? So by opting to participate, you are selecting yourself to be in the sample, right? How would this be biased, right? Well, if you are choosing to participate in the poll, it probably means that you feel strongly about bullying, right? It's not just everybody participating, you are opting to participate. And if you're opting to participate, it usually means that you have some kind of strong feeling about the topic. Okay, second one, a computer science teacher wants to know how students at a school most often access the internet. The teacher asks students in one of the computer science classes. Hopefully you said convenience sample. Okay. The teacher asks students that are in the class already, right, in one of their classes. So it's pretty convenient. I'm a teacher and I want to know how students at school most often access the internet, so I'm just going to ask my class. Okay. But it shows bias because the intent is to know how students at a school, not how computer science students at a school, how students. Okay, so it's biased because the other students in the school don't have an opportunity to participate in the study. All right. Oops. Ignore that. It'll go away in a second. Okay, let's talk about designing a study. You are a member of your school's yearbook committee, and you want to poll members of the senior class to find out what the theme of the yearbook should be. There are 246 students in the senior class. We want to describe a method for selecting a random sample of 50 seniors to poll. Well, the first step would to make a list of all of the seniors, the 246 seniors. Then we're going to assign each senior a different number, 1 through 246, so that we're calling them by number, not by name. Then, if we want to get a random sample of 50 seniors so that we are covering all of the different students, we're going to generate 50 unique numbers from 1 to 246. To help us do that, there's a lot of different tools online. There are random number generators. You have one on your calculator as well. just to show you, and we won't be doing too much of this. This is just kind of more of a fun fact. But if you go to math, which is this button here, and you toggle over to the PRB, it's really like probability. And then you toggle down to number 5 where it says rand integer. I don't know if you can see that at all. Press enter, and then we have to define our range, and we're going from 1 to 246. So you do 1, 246, press enter. Mine was 11. So I then would go to my number 11 student, and I would include that 11 student in my poll, right? So then I would choose the 50 students who correspond to those numbers. That's a really good way to randomize and build a good study. Okay, so I want you now to think about it. Let's say the manager of a concert hall wants to know how often people in the community attend concerts. The manager asks 45 people standing in line for a rock concert how many concerts they attend per year. First, identify the type of sample that we're using here from your 5 types, and then explain why that sample is biased. Pause your video, try it out. Okay, let's check your answer. I would call this a convenience sample. The manager wants to know how often people in the community attend concerts, and he asks the 45 people that are in line at a rock concert. It's convenient for him. They're right there in line, right? But it's biased because if he wants to know people in the community, he's only asking those that are already attending a concert. So the other people in the community who don't attend rock concerts can't participate in the study. Okay. If you have a question about that, drop that in the Edpuzzle. Okay, we are clicking along. Just a few more notes to take. The next type of notes that I want you to jot down are these methods of collecting data. Now, you do not need to write down these giant definitions, okay? The 4 types of collecting data methods that we have are an experiment, which you hear that word all the time, especially if you're in a science class. Basically, it means that you impose a treatment on individuals in order to collect data, okay? It goes into say the treatment may be medical, it could be an action, it could be adding something, right? So that you can make a comparison. But really an experiment is imposing a treatment on individuals in order to collect data. An observational study is just in the name of it, right? It observes individuals and measures variables without controlling the individuals or the environment. So this time we are not adding or changing a thing, we're just observing, okay? A survey is an investigation of one or more characteristics of a population. In a survey, every member of a sample is asked one or more questions, okay? As students, you probably participate in surveys all the time, especially now with online school. So maybe you have a better understanding now of what a survey is. Lastly, a simulation uses a model to reproduce the conditions of a situation or process so that the simulated outcomes closely match the real world outcomes. Okay. So it's kind of like, think of some of our online simulations that we use in math or science to simulate a relationship that's happening. And this is very similar. It uses a model to reproduce that. Okay, so what I want you to do, pause your video, write down those 4 methods of collecting data and a little blurb of what that means to you. All right, hopefully you have that down. So let's do some examples. Let's say we wanted to identify the method of data collection for each of these situations. The first is that a researcher records whether people at a gas station use hand sanitizer. Okay, let me get my pencil. Sorry, I should have had this prepared. Okay, so if a researcher records whether people at a gas station use hand sanitizer, this is just going to be strictly observational. Observational. because the researcher is there just watching who uses hand sanitizer, how many people uses hand sanitizer, right? There's nothing being changed or added to that situation. Part B, a landscaper fertilizes 20 lawns with a regular fertilizer mix and 20 lawns with a new organic fertilizer. The landscaper then compares the lawns after 10 weeks and determines which fertilizer is best. Okay, so he's got 20 lawns with regular fertilizer and 20 lawns with a new fertilizer. So he changed something. He imposed a treatment fertilizer to record the results. That is an experiment. All right, let's see if you can do it now. I want you to identify the method of data collection that each of these 3 situations describes. Pause your video, try it out. Okay, let's see how you did. The first one, members of the student council at your school ask every 8th student who enters the cafeteria whether they like the snacks in the school's vending machines. Hopefully you said survey. We are surveying every 8th student who enters if they like the snacks. The second one, a park ranger measures and records the heights of trees in a park as they grow. That is observational study. We're not doing anything to the trees. We're just watching them grow and making some measurements, right? A researcher uses a computer program to help determine how fast a flu virus might spread within a city. Kind of fitting for, right now, but that is a simulation. We use a computer program to model the situation, so it is a simulation. Drop me a note in the Edpuzzle if you have any questions on those. Okay, the last notes I want you to take, we've talked a lot about bias, but we haven't really defined it, right? So I want you to jot these down. This is a good kind of rule of thumb if you want to avoid biased questions. So if we're making questions for a study, we want to avoid questions that encourage a particular response. Like that texting and driving one, right? It felt targeted to say the word dangerous, so it encouraged a no response. We want to avoid that. Do not provide enough information to give an accurate opinion, right? Avoid questions that are too sensitive to answer truthfully. If you're asking a question that your participants don't feel like they can answer truthfully, your data is going to be skewed. Avoid questions that address more than one issue. Okay, so pause your video, jot those down. Okay, last thing, then let's wrap this all up a little bit. Let's say that a dentist surveys his patients by asking, do you brush your teeth at least twice per day and floss every day? Explain why the question may be biased or otherwise introduce bias into the survey. Think about that for a second. It's because patients who brush less than 2 times a day or don't floss daily, they might be afraid to admit this because the dentist is asking, right? It's almost like if a teacher is asking you something about, do you do your homework every day? You're kind of feeling like you should say yes, even though the answer may be no, right? So there is maybe bias there. And then let's think about how can we correct the flaw? I want you to think about this and drop your answer in the Edpuzzle. How could we correct that flaw? Okay, I'll show you my idea. You may have an awesome idea too. My idea is maybe to have patients answer questions about dental hygiene on paper and then put the paper anonymously into a box or something, right? So that they don't feel pressured to share their answer, but they can answer freely. Okay, just some things to think about. So I know this is a weirder lesson because there's not too much math involved. It's all on designing that study, but understanding what makes a good study and what doesn't make a good study. So nice job getting through this video. You may get started with the 10.3 Big Ideas assignment that's been posted. You will have all class period tomorrow to work on it, but ultimately it's due Sunday night at midnight. Okay, awesome job today. And I'll see you in the next Edpuzzle. Bye, y'all.